please join me in the call to worship printed in the bulletin. We'll all speak together for the bolded words. In the end, of course, a true war story is never about war. It's about sunlight. It's about the special way that dawn spreads out on a river when you know you must cross the river and march into the mountains and do the things you are afraid to do. It's about love and memory. It's about sorrows. It's about people who never listen. Now please rise in body or spirit for hymn number 283, Spirit of the Living God.
Good morning, everyone. We don't have a picture book this morning. I hope you're not too disappointed. But we do, I know, I'm sorry. Failed to deliver on that one. But we do have a really good story from a great book called Buddhist Stories for Kids. Yeah, it's very cool, and it's kind of Aesop fable-y or something like that. And there's always kind of a little teaching to the story. And so we've got a good one this morning. This one is called The Parrot and the Fig Tree. Long ago, in another place and time, a little parrot hatched. His parents lived in a cozy hollow of a fig tree. His mother and father cared for him, bringing him worms and grubs to eat. They taught him how to fly and how to hide from predators in the green boughs of the tree. Soon, other parrots came to live there. The land was rich. The parrots flew about, gathering nuts, flowers, fruit. It was a good life. After a few months, it was time for Parrot's parents to be on their way. "Goodbye, my child," his mother told him one day. "I will miss you, but it's time for you to make your own way in the world. You'll find good company with the tree and with your friends." She nuzzled him, and with that, Parrot's mother and father fluttered their colorful wings and disappeared into the blue, blue sky. From that time on, Parrot lived in the fig tree with the other parrots. The tree produced flavorful figs every season. Parrot gave the tree the feeling of being needed and loved. In turn, the tree took care of Parrot. In this way, fig tree and parrot became the best of friends. The years went by, and one fall, a drought came over the earth. The river nearby dried to a trickle. Fig tree began to lose her leaves. She no longer produced figs to eat. The other parrots said, "This tree can no longer give us what we need. Let's fly away and find another place to live." But Parrot shook his head. "I was born in this tree. I grew up in this tree. This tree is giving me everything I've needed my whole life. Now she's in trouble. This tree is my friend, and here I shall stay." "Suit yourself," said the other parrots, literally, "suit yourself." And off they flew in a colorful swirl of wings and feathers. The days went by, and the tree became twisted and dry. No more did her bright green leaves protect Parrot. No more did she feed him juicy figs. And yet, Parrot stayed on. He would fly to the trickle of water in the riverbed and sip a bit of the water that was left. He would sprinkle a bit of water on the fig tree. He became weak and tired, just eating seeds that came drifting by, but he would not leave his friend now that she was ill. Parrot looked up at the sky and cried out for help, but none came. The next day, a wise crane came flying by. With her long neck, her red head and legs decked out in gray feathers, she flew gracefully around the fig tree. Looking down, she saw Parrot perched in the dry branches of the withered tree. She fluttered down and settled herself on a branch next to Parrot. "Tell me, my fine feathered friend, why do you stay in this tree? There are greener trees farther north. Come with me, and I'll help you find one." "Thank you for your kindness, Crane," murmured Parrot, "but this tree has been my friend for many years. We've been through good times together, and I'm not leaving her just because times are hard." So this magnificent crane was really the Buddha. Somebody's always really the Buddha. She heard Parrot's cry, and she had come. Her heart was moved by Parrot's loyalty. "Tell me, Parrot, what is your most heartfelt wish?" "I wish for my friend to be returned to health and happiness, and I won't leave her side until this comes to pass. But no matter what, I will stay with her always." Crane and Fig Tree both heard this plea. "May it be so," whispered Crane. "May it be so," whispered Fig Tree. So the crane looked at the skies, and dark rain clouds began to gather. Fig Tree reached deep down within herself, where she found a little sliver of green life. Suddenly, the skies opened, and the rains thundered down. Soon the river ran strong, with currents running over themselves and fish leaping downstream. Parrot laughed with happiness. Fig Tree sighed, and green buds began to peek shyly from her branches. Miraculously, dark purple figs suddenly appeared in the branches into the light. Parrot was astonished. "Tell me," Parrot said to Crane, "how did this come to be?" "Your deep love for this withered tree has stirred her roots and branches to bring forth new life. The skies and rain heard your cry and wanted to help. You refused to abandon your friend when hard times came, and the universe heard your heartfelt wish." Little Parrot, who would one day be reborn as a monk to the Buddha, knew the true meaning of this tale. There is perhaps nothing more precious than a true friend. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Liz Tiffany Jones, and I will be doing the social justice moment this morning. When Jenny approached me to do this, I thought, oh boy, what in the world am I going to talk about? And what are you passionate about? Well, I'm passionate about a lot of things, and it's like, how do I start this? So what I decided to do in my presentation today is take a moment to do a reflection of where I was and what I've been doing and what I hope to do in the future when it comes to reaching out to people and being of service. I knew that when I retired, I had in the back of my mind, what can I do to provide support in some way to marginalized groups or whomever. And so I thought back on what I had done. And I remember as a young girl, I don't know how young I was, and I still kind of think this way, but I'm more mature now, is I wanted to be that person to save the world. Very idealistic, but obviously in my heart, I knew that things were not right in the world, locally, nationally, globally, I don't know. I was somewhat aware of that. Recently, I came across a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I think that speaks to me, and what he had said is, if I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way. I thought, oh, okay, well, I can do that. So with that, I have many passions. And I thought back at my years living in Reno, Nevada, and one of the things that I participated in, Women's March one year. And being a teacher at that time, there was a big march to end gun violence, and made my poster and all that. And I started thinking, as a teacher, one of the programs that we had started in our school district was parent-teacher home visits. And again, building that community with the parents and getting to know them on a more personal level. And that probably stood out to me more than anything else, that sense of community and that connection, whether we met at McDonald's or the public library, or they even welcomed me in their home. It was a very, very moving experience. And I was involved with a couple of churches when I was there, and I was trained as a Stephen minister. So again, having that opportunity to be trained, to know how to listen, and know how to minister. Whenever I've relocated, and it hasn't been too many times, the first place I head to is a church. And that happened even here when I came to Ohio. I started searching around the churches here in Geauga County, and it wasn't until I saw that pride flag hanging out at the corner that I thought, that's the church, because I had been looking at other churches. And to me, that's really important for me as a part of starting to feel like a part of a community, because church is so significant to me. To go to a church, but also be watchful, discerning as to what they're teaching and what are they doing out in the community. Well, this church does it, and I'm just so, I feel so wonderful about being involved with this church. And I remember Jessica saying, she kept emphasizing that community, and I thought, that's so, so important, to be together here for any number of functions, or even dancing like we did yesterday. Anyway, so I started thinking, okay, what have I been doing now that I'm here in Geauga County that can reach out to people who are needing that extra support? So my husband Mark and I deliver meals to seniors who are homebound here in Geauga County. And that has been a wonderful ministry, getting to know these people, listening to them, reaching out to them, and supporting them in any way I can besides just handing them a hot meal. I also was brought to my attention of a choral group that meets also at the Department on Aging. And I love to sing, and again, this was a time, again, another new community of what I'm interested in, but it goes a little bit further than that, because then we go out into the community to nursing homes and assisted living and sing to them. So again, another type of ministry. I have to give credit to Susan Kruger, who approached me when I first came to this church. And she's great about knowing what's going on in the community. And when she talked about Women United, which is a part of United Way and what it is all about, my eyes lit up, because, that promotes literacy for adults and children in Geauga County. So now I'm involved with that group as well. You know, replenishing the little libraries that you see throughout local parks or in schools, and community events. So there we are again, reaching out to the community, talking with people, parents, children, and providing that literacy. And then I started, so I'm kind of going off in another tangent here, but still dealing with social justice, because especially with what was going on during the election and then since then, I've been bombarded, and I know many people have been bombarded with a lot of negative, scary thoughts and policies and what they want to do. And there were, then I started thinking, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, I'm feeling sad, and even feeling hopeless at times. And I started thinking, this is, what can I do? What can I do? Because I think, when is this ever going to end? When is poverty ever going to end? When is racism ever going to end? And it's been going on since human beings walked on the earth. And I was like, oh, well, so what can we do? And I came across another quote of a minister I follow. His name he's the Reverend Dr. Mark Sandlin. Charity is necessary, but charity without justice is complicit in supporting systems that create the need of charity. And that's where I would feel that frustration. I want to reach out and help people, but at what point can those systems turn around and we can live in peace and harmony? So I thought, what can I do now? I can't go out and save the world. So I decided right away that I could support the ACLU by providing money. I've always have followed the Southern Poverty Law Center, so I'm thinking, well, I can provide money that way and support the people who do go out there and do the work. I can educate myself. One person I follow is Heather Cox Richardson, and just being very discerning about who I'm reading and listening to, and being, using that critical thinking. I also realized that I need to take care of myself spiritually. Take some time to dance, exercise, socialize, eat right, and so on. Now, I have a little thought, it's like, oh, I can't do that. That seems so selfish. But, for that half an hour or so, I think it's okay. I also, despite the fact that I still am on Facebook, it does provide some inspiration for me, especially if someone or an organization posts a quote from Rumi or Martin Luther King Jr. or whomever. There are some key people I really draw inspiration from: the Reverend Benjamin Kremer, the Reverend Elizabeth Caton, and the Reverend William J. Barber. So some of those things, all of these come together to help me in my spiritual life. And of course, vote, with a capital V-O-T-E, vote. I wanted to close with a couple of poems, one by Howard Thurman, and it's called The Work of Christmas. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among brothers, to make music in the heart. Another poem that I'd like to share with you, and I just found out about this young man who became very close to Jimmy Carter. His name is, he goes by Matty J.T. Stepanek. He is no longer with us, but I first heard about him when the news was just talking about all sorts of people in Jimmy Carter's life, and this young man became a part of that. And they became very good friends. And so I came across this poem that Matty wrote. I cannot wait to become a peacemaker. I cannot wait to help the world overcome anger and problems of evil. I cannot wait for the world to be peaceful and for everyone to live in harmony. I cannot wait to grow and be and overcome, but I will wait with patience and hope and peace.
Friends, if you would like to contribute a financial show of support for the work and life of this church community, you can do it several different ways. You can scan the QR code. You can go to chesterlanducc.org and click on Donate. Or you can, as I like to say, do it the old-fashioned way like I do and send a check to 11984 Caves Road. That's Chesterland, Ohio, 44026. Please know, however, in whatever way you support the work and life of this church, your donations are most gratefully received. Thank you.
Today's ancient scripture is by Motse, when all the people of the world love. When all the people of the world love, then the strong will not overpower the weak. The man will not oppress the few, or the many will not oppress the few. The wealthy will not mock the poor. The honored will not disdain the humble. And today's modern reading is We Are Here by Stephen Kendrick. We are here to face the truth about ourselves, about this faith we love, and the way it presently serves others and the world, as well as to open ourselves to the ways it can be better and more joyfully reflect our potential and core values. We want to know the ways we are bound to one another, as well as to larger religious movements normally beyond our sight and vision. We say we are open and diverse, yet it is too easy to feel stuck in our old paths and stubborn habits, reflecting not so much our tradition as our comfort. We want to answer the call to service to a world that needs our message, our hope, our revived energy. We are gathered to learn, to unlearn, to hear, and to move forward. Amen.
So today is our third in our little series about what kind of Buddhist wisdom can we gather and take with us on our journey for strength, for inspiration, for whatever. Today we're talking about radical engagement. Radical engagement is basically the Buddhist term for social justice. If you watched the news this week, you saw firsthand the bishop of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., engage in a little radical engagement. If you missed it, Bishop Marianne Edgar Budde of the National Cathedral looked Donald John Trump in the eye and pled with him to have mercy on the frightened LGBTQIA+ youth and on the immigrants who may not, as she reminded us, have the proper documentation, but who, she said, pay taxes and are good neighbors. When I saw Bishop Budde speaking to the president, I thought about Tim O'Brien's words from our call to worship. His words seemed uniquely fitting as we are called to begin this radical engagement with the new administration. In the end, of course, a true war story is never about war. It's about sunlight. It's about the special way that dawn spreads out on a river when you know you must cross the river and march into the mountains and do things you are afraid to do. It's about love and memory. It's about sorrows. It's about people who never listen. How do we radically engage compassionately in the middle of a war? I think that's the question in front of us. In our series about Buddhism and social justice, we've touched on self-compassion, and Liz talked about it a little bit, not feeling guilty about taking that half hour to give ourselves strength for the journey. We also talked about radical compassion, finding the good in others when sometimes that can be almost impossible to do. Today we're talking about radical engagement, the practice of understanding our interdependence on other people, other beings, on the earth, as the underlying value that gives rise to the great compassion, as Buddha would call it, that fuels the engaged Buddhism or the social justice. So that's what we saw in our little story for the kiddos this morning, is that parrot's feelings toward the tree fueled his compassion and fueled his social justice of holding the space with that tree and refusing to go. That's exactly what that's an illustration of. Buddhism, like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, is a very diverse tradition. Most of us Westerners think of Zen Buddhism when we hear Buddhism. It's by far the most popular kind of Buddhism in the United States. Thich Nhat Hanh, whose work we heard earlier this month, was a Zen monk in Vietnam. He is often credited with shifting the way contemporary Buddhists think about social justice. Classic Zen Buddhism, which is what he studied in his whole life and became a monk in, held that if one sought enlightenment, one would recognize that we're all interdependent beings. That would be a result of your meditations. This recognition would spark compassion. In turn, if you meditated and studied long enough, you would become an enlightened being. And if you become an enlightened being and reach nirvana, you can heal the world. It's a long road, number one, and it's largely an individualistic pursuit. So when Thich Nhat Hanh, back in the 70s, suggested that Zen Buddhists should act now and try and effect peace and end the Vietnam War, he was saying something profoundly revolutionary within his own tradition, and it changed contemporary Buddhism. Buddhist author Susan Davis wrote this about this big change in Buddhism as she experienced this. At the time of my first Buddhist retreat in the early 80s, I was quite active in the anti-nuclear movement. I wrote articles on disarmament, worked with nuclear freeze groups, and worried deeply that my friends, family, and familiar world would disappear in one hot blast. On retreat, the threat of nuclear war seemed far beyond the sunny farmhouse kitchen in which I drank my tea. Indeed, I forgot about nuclear war until the last day, when I looked out over the frozen pastures and wondered if anyone had dropped the bomb in my absence. I wondered, too, if I could escape the pain of the politics of the war by meditating devoutly for a very long time. I was not alone in this delusion. Delusion is a Buddhist word for not really seeing the truth. In the late 70s and early 80s, few American Buddhists were making the link between personal practice and political action. So, all that to say, radical engagement is relatively new in Buddhist circles. I studied Buddhism a lot when I was in seminary, and I was very shocked to learn that this is fairly new for them within the last few decades. But there is one Buddhist tradition that has been radically engaged since the 13th century. Mahayana, or Pure Land Buddhism, is lesser known in North America, but it's the dominant mainstream religion in Japan. The type of Pure Land Buddhism practiced in Japan is called Shin, after the teacher who, some 800 years ago, give or take, pushed back against his own tradition of Pure Land Buddhism because it was not radically engaged enough. So we're talking the 1200s, right? Poor people dropping like flies, not enough food, not enough whatever. And he's saying, you know what, you can meditate and get to nirvana, and that's great, and you can encourage your friends to do that or whatever, but it's for the poor and disenfranchised, it's horrendous, and we need to do something about that. Shinran, the teacher in question, had a very different conception of Buddhism. Rather than studying and meditating, Shinran thought that all people, good people, bad people, common people, royals, whoever, all attained nirvana. So you didn't even have to work for it. It reminded me of universalism. Unitarian Universalism, hundreds of years later, would make the same argument. We all get in, is the argument, right? So once in nirvana, this is what Shinran thought and taught, once you pass, you're in nirvana, you become so enlightened and so deeply compassionate that you can't stay there because you see all these people on earth still suffering. So you're in nirvana for a hot minute, and then you bounce back down and you help and effect social justice on the earth. That was really cool, right? Instead of angel wings and just hanging out, you're in, out, bang, back, which it makes a lot of sense, right? Could you really watch what was happening and not want to be compelled to go back and help? Practitioners of Shin here on earth who have yet to die and transcend to nirvana express their gratitude of this assured ascent by practicing compassionate social justice while still here on earth. So that's kind of the way that it works for them. Nembutsu is the Buddhist word for compassion expressed as social justice. When you hear people stand up here giving their social justice moments, like Liz did this morning, and they talk about feeding the hungry here in Cleveland, or working to tell people about harmful legislation that's happening that will affect schools and children in Ohio. Our sanctuary churches, John talked about sanctuary churches last Sunday that help to protect people whom ICE would deport. That's Nembutsu. If pray without ceasing was Paul's encouragement to the Thessalonians, service to others without ceasing would be the way that Shen Buddhists talk about Nembutsu. It's just what you do. The principle on which this Nembutsu is based, whether Shin Buddhist or UCC, is remarkably similar and really simple. It's compassion. Compassion for ourselves, which is where it has to start, compassion, finding the good in others, and finally a recognition that we're all in this together, that interdependence that the parrot had with the tree and that we have with one another. I attended a funeral this week at my old UU church in Akron. One of the most awesome and fun social justice women I have ever met had died. Anne was a lawyer for the ACLU and a mentor to dozens of students and fellow instructors at Akron U. Anne lived a lifetime of Nembutsu and mentored people like me. What she and other UU women taught me, by example mostly, was being radically engaged in social justice isn't about doing, it's about feeling. The why has to be ever present. And that's the Buddhist message here. We must take time to be in touch with our own compassion. We must tend it and water it and give it sunlight. If we don't, the fight will be overwhelming and we will be consumed by it. Radical engagement is not just engaging with the problems and the injustice in the world. Nembutsu means radically engaging with our own spirits so that our compassion fuels us and propels us right out of nirvana or off the couch. Without allowing ourselves to feel that compassion, social justice becomes an intellectual exercise or a political exercise, maybe. But at the end, it's a religious one. And it is ever so closely tied to spirituality, our own. Buddhists would say it arises in Buddhism from our feeling and our religious practices. The Buddhist writer Ken MacLeod explains what it means to stay in touch with our spirituality and our compassion. He writes, "This compassion is more than mere sentiment. It is a clear knowing that frees us from the need to control what arises in our lives." Buddhism talks about that a lot. When you're meditating and something comes up, you'll be like, and no, I don't want to deal with that, right? You have to deal with your arising stuff that arises. It is the only spiritual quality that cuts through cultural conditioning to let us see the harm our culture may do to others, whether that culture is our family, our friends, our church, a society, or our country, which made me think of the bishop's speech. When we see through the beliefs and the blindness of our own culture and upbringing, everything in our being shifts. It is inconceivable to us that others should suffer because of our beliefs. We see how directly how destructive suffering is and how unnecessary so much of it is. Kind of what Liz was saying today. Why is this constant cycle? How unnecessary is that? We cannot ignore this, MacLeod writes. Whatever our work, however we live, our chief concern is to free others from their confusion and their struggles, regardless of the implications for ourselves. Feeling the why behind our social justice is the key to longevity in this work, like my friend Anne. This is not an intellectual exercise, but a spiritual one. Whether we draw inspiration from Jesus urging us to love our neighbors as ourselves, or from our own compassion that comes from Buddhist meditation or whatever, social justice effort will arise organically from that spiritual practice. I got to interview a Buddhist professor up in Canada. I didn't go, we did this by phone, whose name is Jeff Wilson, so no confusion here. Also a great guy, but just a coincidence. He just wrote a relatively new book about Nembutsu. He's a Pure Land guy, and my professor said, you need to talk to Jeff because you know you've learned about Zen and Theravada and Tibetan, and what you've not learned about is Mahayana, Pure Land Buddhism. You got to call this guy. I'm like, okay, I'll call. And he turned out to be a Unitarian Universalist. So we were on the phone for a while. Wonderful guy. So he just wrote a book a couple of years ago about Nembutsu, and I finally cracked it open and read it, preparing for the service today. It's incredible. Jeff calls that arising that spirituality that propels you out of nirvana and off the couch. The power of a trusting heart. I loved that. I thought that was great. The power of a trusting heart. And his spin on it, he urges us when times are tough to be in Sangha. Sangha just means community, like a church community. That's what the Buddhists call that, Sangha. He says that amazing feeling that we get when we're working together on some social justice issue. Liz and I are at the Women's March together. Did not know that. Too bad we could have driven down together. When you're doing that with a bunch of other people, that incredible feeling you get when you're actually boots on the ground and you're doing the work, he says that's a touch of nirvana that you're going to experience and feel. He urges us when times are tough to be in Sangha, to be in community. He says that amazing feeling we get when we're working hard is a glimpse of nirvana. And we should do everything we can to feel that over and over again as we radically engage in community for our communities. At the beginning of this talk today, we talked about Bishop Buddy and her radical engagement this week. I listened to an interview with her the next day. I was struck, not so much by what she had said to the president, as I was by what she said in that interview to me, and I think to you. The interviewer asked her, "What do you see as the role of the church in helping to lead the public and in helping us to understand what our moral responsibilities are?" Bishop Buddy replied, "The first and primary role we have is by example. To take the teachings of our faith, to welcome the stranger, to love as we've been loved, to be compassionate, and to live that out in real terms with real people in our communities," which of course Community Church Chesterland does all the time. That's foundational, she said. And then, when given the opportunity to speak, and to be at times a conscience and at other times a consolation. Bishop Buddy wrote a book called How to Be Brave, and clearly she's an expert. The book is a couple of years old, and there were a few copies left at Amazon and wherever, and of course they flew off the shelves just like that. But the publisher, Penguin Random House, still has it in print, and they're rushing copies back in. It is my most anticipated read of 2025, and you may want to add it to yours. As we move forward, we'll be called on as people of faith in perhaps ways that we have never been before, to live out the teachings of Christian faith in our community. And frankly, how to be brave sounds like a handbook for change, and I'm there for it. For the aptly named Community Church of Chesterland, all of this is not new learning, but it is liable to be a longer and harder fight than it has been before. The political pundits have been talking a lot about Trump 2.0 and what Donald John Trump learned from his first 4 years in office. Well, you know what? You and I learned a lot too. We learned to love out loud, to express our compassion and caring, both for the people in our churches and in the wider community who suffered because of the callousness of a first Trump administration. If this is Trump 2.0, what the political pundits may not realize is that for us, it's radical engagement 2.0. Been there, done that. We're stronger, we're more experienced, and we're ready. Ready, as Bishop Buddy would have us be, to be at times a conscience and at other times a consolation. This afternoon, this church gathers to make some important decisions about its future at the annual meeting. I cannot think of a better or more important time for Community Church of Chesterland 2.0. The Unitarian Universalists have a hymn that includes the words, "Gather in peace, gather in strength, gather in sympathy now and then." As you gather today in peace, in strength, and in sympathy, this day, friends, know that you are both the conscience and the consolation. Blessed be, and amen. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Blessed be, and amen.
This song I have to acknowledge Dale K. Rogers, who wrote it, and he's actually in the process of getting a book published, so if you want to look him up, he's a composer, so he's got a lot of work.
No.